I took voiceover with you because I thought it was, another skill adding to my skill set as an actor.
Mhm.
And I never thought that when you said in our class that you are actually having a career and
Mhm.
making money and making a life out of
Mhm.
just doing voice acting, it was
Mhm.
amazing to hear. And I had no idea that you can just do that
Oh
as
yeah,
a career. So how did that happen? I know you have a wonderful story that the industry came to you.
pretty much. Yeah.
So would you mind sharing that?
No, not at all. No, I mean, originally, I was an actor for many years in New York. My acting career was mostly theater. It pretty much started in the early 90s. And I was doing theater, not very much on camera yet, but I was about to. But something else happened while I was doing an off Broadway show that was kind of a hit. The show called Tony and Tina's Wedding. It was like this big interactive piece about an Italian marriage from two people from Queens, and the audience were the guests. So you interacted with the characters, and I played the best man, and it was a really good role, really fun, really kind of showy role, and we did it at a time when a lot of industry people came to see it. A lot of agents, casting people. There was a lot of word out about the show. So I was contacted by these two young agents from Abrams Artists, which is a pretty big agency in New York. Or was they don't exist anymore, but they were pretty big. And they wanted to represent me, not on a signed basis, just on a freelance basis for on-camera commercials, which I had never auditioned for before. So I started auditioning for on-camera commercials, and I booked one. It was a promo for the TV show Inside Edition, and the script was about people replaying their lottery ticket. And I played one of the characters whose girlfriend is trying to convince him to replay his lottery ticket. He's kind of this tough Italian American guy. And it ran like all over television, all over network television, and it was also a radio spot as well. So
Right.
I went in to record the radio spot for it, doing the same character, same script. And the woman who wrote and directed it and produced it said, I've got something else for you next week that you're going to be perfect for. It's also a radio spot. So I'm going to call your agent and book you for that too. And I was like, great, sure. Following week, I get a call, but not from Abrams. I get a call from a different agency, an agency that also doesn't exist anymore, but we're very big, J. Michael Bloom and Associates. And they called me and said, hello, this is so-and-so from J. Michael Bloom. We have a booking for you. And I was like, I don't know anybody at J. Michael Bloom. And they go, well, yeah, we checked to see if you were signed with anyone. And we saw that you were only freelancing with an agency. And Joy Golden, the producer, called looking for you. So we took the booking. I was like, okay. So I happened to have had the phone number for the producer, Joy Golden, who is this really great, former Mad Men era ad agency lady who lived in New York City, and she had a great sense of humor. And I called her and I said, hey, Joy, this is Bruce Kronenberg. And she goes, oh, honey, did they book you for the job?
Huh?
And I said, yeah. I said, except it was another agency. And they want to meet with me and talk to me this coming week. That was the other thing I forgot to say, is that not only did they give me the booking, but they wanted to set up a meeting. And she's
Wow.
like, wait a minute, let me look at my list. Oh, she said, I got you mixed up with somebody else. That's how it happened. She mistakenly called Michael Bloom, J. Michael Bloom, looking for me. because somebody next to my name was with them. Long story
Sorry,
short,
did you?
yes, long story short, I went in to meet with the voiceover department at J. Michael Bloom, and they immediately signed me without hardly knowing me. They had heard that spot, and they decided that they wanted to work with me. So that was Chaz Cowing, my first voiceover agent. And I had never done voiceovers before. I said to him, I've never done this before. I mean, I said, do actors do voiceovers? And this was key. This was key for me because he said, well, yeah. He said, what did you think? And I said, well, I thought like people from the radio did voiceovers, like announcers and disc jockeys and people like that. He goes, no. He says that era is kind of passing, you know, and there's a new era in voiceovers now, which has to do with actors who can sound genuine and real and not like an announcer. And he said, you have this very natural sounding voice. I hear a lot of possibilities in it. So, you know, when you go into audition, don't try to sound like you're doing a voiceover. He said, just try to sound like you. And I said, oh, okay. And that's what I started doing.
This is actually very interesting. Thank you for sharing that story. It's that's a dream for most of us.
I know.
It doesn't come to us. We don't
I know.
have to
It just kind of happened. And it really kind of at first kind of threw me because I had never thought of it as a pursuit of any kind. I always thought, well, you know, I'm an actor. I want to do theater. I want to do TV. I want to do movies. I didn't even think that voiceover was a possibility. And that, fortunately, that just completely changed my whole idea of what it was.
That's
you know,
right.
I thought it was something else, and it turned out to be something that I had no idea it was originally.
Wow, it was meant for you. It was meant to be for you, right?
I guess so. Yeah.
You have your own company.
Yeah.
You created your own voiceover. Yes. How did you end up creating your own company? Let's start with that.
So I was working pretty much nonstop as a voiceover talent from 1990 until about 2007. And in 2007, I noticed things started to slow up for me, voiceover wise. Things had switched over from union to non-union work. And that was the result of a strike that happened in 2000. And the industry had changed exponentially. And I noticed that there was a drop off. And unless I was willing to change my status with Screen Actors Guild and do non-union work, I'm not looking at getting as much work as I used to.
You didn't have to wait a long time to become SAG?
No. I became a member of SAG way back when I first started acting. But I did one episode of Law and Order, and I became a member of SAG.
Right.
But you know, I thought, okay, well, I'm not getting as much work, but I'm wondering if this is something I might be able to coach. I might be able to teach. I might be able to pass on some of my knowledge that I gained being in the business for so long and figuring out how to do this on my own. I might be able to pass this on to people who are interested. So I started working with a voiceover coach who's no longer with us. She passed away a few years ago. And while I was there, the guy that was working with her became my business partner. She sort of got out of the business, started teaching privately from her home, and her guy that she was working with, who was my business partner, Brian Falk, he's a producer and an engineer. We decided to start a business together.
Okay. Along
with another guy who didn't work out in the long run. And we eventually started, advertising our business, doing it mostly organically, But we weren't one of those people that went on the internet going, hey, do you want to do voiceovers? There's a lot of that. There's a lot of money grabs out there. So we tried to do it in an honest way. And we tried to very slowly build a reputation as being a place where you can get great coaching, great instruction, an excellent demo. And we had we had a studio and an office in the Film Center building on 44th and 9th. And eventually we didn't need it anymore. Eventually, as the business changed, we didn't need it. It was a big space, and we didn't really need it anymore. All we needed was a recording studio. So we wound up moving to a recording studio in the Flatiron district.
Okay.
And that's where we do our demos. That's where we do voiceover production. And I mostly work from home, like where I'm sitting with you right now.
So that's how you coach. How does the process look like? What does it look like?
Usually, we start with a 15-minute consultation. We meet with you on Zoom, and we try to get an idea of who you are and why you're interested in voiceover, where you're coming from. We tend to not work with people who we feel don't understand it from an interpretive point of view. In other words, like sometimes if we get someone, they're like, yeah, everybody at work tells me I have a great voice and I want to do voiceovers. And I say, okay. And I talk to them a little bit about the process and about interpreting scripts, because I'm coming at it from an acting point of view.
That's right.
As well as my other coaches and my business partner who creates demos. We're all coming from an acting point of view. And if I get someone who's not coming from that background and they don't quite understand and they think it's about what their voice sounds like, my tendency is to say, you might want to go take some acting lessons, or you might try another studio. We don't work with everybody. We try to keep it within the realm of people who have the ability to sound like they're really talking to someone, as opposed to presenting it or announcing it or performing it. Even actors sometimes have the hard time, especially actors who do Broadway and do musicals. We've worked with a lot of people like that, and they tend to have a hard time adjusting to just acting for the microphone and making it small and real and honest. They always feel like they have to do more than they're doing.
Yeah.
And we try to move people in that direction.
I remember in the class you would emphasize on finding your emotional point of view.
Yep.
Before you go into reading your copy.
Mm-hmm.
And the copy is the script for the voiceover, right? How would you help somebody who has who doesn't really have access to their emotions, or the emotions are blocked and they're like, I'm frozen. How am I gonna? So how do you help your students?
That's a good question. I try to couch it in a different way by saying, well, it's not about emotion, it's about opinion. Or it's your point of view. Like, how do you feel about this? What do you think about this? Right? If you're doing a spot for Clorox handy wipes, all right, if you come up with an opinion quickly, yeah, they're great, Clorox handy wipes. So I just said it like they were great, as opposed to saying Clorox handy wipes, right? Which is old school kind of voiceover. So I'll try to get them to have an opinion about it or a point of view. If emotionally connecting to it is not easy for them.
Is there a particular technique that you use, like an acting technique that you use?
Yeah. One of the things I'll do is to get them to try to understand where the writer's coming from. And that's from my acting background. That's from studying with Stella Adler, a class she taught called script interpretation, where you try to get into the ideas that the writer is putting forth in the copy. So I might say, okay, so what do you think this copy is about? And if they say, well, it's about Budweiser, I'm like, yeah, I know that, but what is the writer doing to sell Budweiser? What have they chosen? What's the story they're telling, right? And then I'll get them to sort of lock into that, right? I'm like, okay, now that we got the story, now choose someone in your life to tell the story to.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And preface it with a moment before. Okay? And that sort of begins to loosen them up. That gets them to personalize it, as opposed to being detached from it and delivering a read that's detached and doesn't have any kind of personalization. Personalization is the most important thing you can do with copy. And however you do it, is there's really no right way to do it. Okay? There's no right or wrong way to personalize. Personalization is your way of doing it. Right. So, but if you don't do that, if you don't personalize it, you might be setting yourself up for a disappointment, because if they hear a read that's not personalized, they're going to bypass it, you know? So if you want to like at least get some feedback, or if you want to book the job, do something with the copy that is personal and is activated in a way that comes from you. I always tell people, now that auditioning is all about auditioning on your own, you're not really working with a casting director anymore. You're doing it on your own in your own home setup. You have to be the one to decide whether you like it or not, right?
Yes.
That's why I tell people to try not to record with headphones, listen back to it, have a goal that you set for what you want it to be.
What do you mean by that?
Meaning, like let's say you decided what the story is, you decided who you're talking to, and you say, okay, I'm going to try a take. You do the take, you listen back to it. Nah, I didn't quite get it there. I lost who I was talking to. It sounds forced. Next take. That sounds better, more relaxed, right? I try to get people to nail it in 3 takes.
Okay.
And not spend, 20 takes trying to get it right.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can drain all the life out of it that way. So once they have a take that they like, they send that one off. And you got to trust that, right? You don't want to get hung up in things like, what if they don't like the way I said this? Or what if they don't like that? Or what if they don't approve of this? And I'm like, well, first of all, you're talking about a ghost. You don't know who's listening to this, right? It could be the producer, it could be the client. You don't know who's listening. So if you spend an inordinate amount of time trying to please someone you haven't even spoken to yet or met, that's going to hang you up.
So this is very interesting, because if you were to compare this to acting is more, well, voiceover also too is subjective. So in acting, they see you, they see the product, they see what you can bring, they see your energy, they see like there is a visual element to it. In voiceover, there is no visual element. They just hearing. So they hear your voice and that's it. You either booked or rejected.
That's right.
Right? So how can you, in such competitive industry, how can you stand out in your with your voice?
Well, here's the thing. Like I just said, the more that you personalize and the more you make it yours, right, the better your chances of standing out. Okay? Because you don't sound like anybody else, right?
I don't, for sure.
Anyone. But I'm saying like, the more comfortable you are with sounding like you and doing it in your own personal way, that's eventually going to catch somebody's ear. Okay.
Yeah.
In other words, there's no easy route towards whether you're going to like be successful or whether you're going to book or not. I mean, no one has a crystal ball. And I tell my students that, So how do you stand out? Be who you are. Be honest about your read. Be personal. I keep using that word, but it's so important. And trust that that's going to be enough, right? If you try to do more, or if you try to sound like somebody else, or if you try to not sound like you, right, that's going to sound artificial, right?
True.
So there really is no easy answer in terms of how to stand out. I just always think that the more personalized and the more honest your read is, and the choice that you've made. Stella Adler once said, your talent lies in your choice. Okay? So whatever choice you've made and you listened back to it and thought, I really like that. I like that read. I'm going to send it. right? You got to trust that.
Trust your instinct.
Trust your instinct, trust your choice. And eventually someone's going to go, that person.
Yes.
Yeah.
That brought actually me to the next question I wanted to ask you. So for acting, and I keep comparing this because you can treat them separately as different industries, right? Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
So for acting, there is no timeline for all actors. Each actor, each individual has their own path and their own journey. Somebody just gets into acting and boom, they're on the silver screen. Somebody just keeps going and go years after years and years keep getting rejected.
Yeah.
So I wanted to see whether voiceover is the same. There is no timeline and there is no path that you can go and then you get to success after that timeline? Or is it like the acting that it depends on
luck
and then your destiny in a way, if you're even meant to be to do that?
I think what's different now, when I started doing voiceovers, there was just a set group of people that did it back in the early 90s in New York and LA, a little bit in Chicago. Now the voiceover industry is like nationwide, worldwide. And, you know, I have a guy working with me. His name is Tom Aglio. And Tom is a full-time voiceover guy. And he is really good at direct marketing. So I have found that when people ask me a question like, you know, what's the timeline? Like you're saying, like, how long before I know that I've started to gain some kind of success in this, right? The only thing I can say to people like that, and I'll say the same thing to you, is that the people that pursue this 24/7, because now it's a pursuit, okay? I never pursued the voiceover industry. It fell in my lap, and I just did what my agents told me, and I went to see casting directors, and that's how it happened for me. Now you've got people like the guy who works with me, Tom, who goes after it every day and has returning clients and is constantly marketing himself without an agent, without a manager, right? He's literally a business, right? I find that people like him tend to succeed faster than people who are waiting, right? Or just sending out random auditions and not marketing themselves as a working entity, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So he's being proactive about it himself.
You have to be. I think that if you are proactive like he is, and it's not just Tom. Tom happens to work with us, but there's quite a few people out there who do what he does. Actually, my other coach, Emma, she also markets herself a great deal, but she works more primarily with agents, and so does he. But you see, that's the thing, is like agents used to be like the gatekeepers of the industry, agents and casting people. Now it's not so much. You know, agents are important. It's great to work with an agent. They certainly have, you know, a connection to producers, casting directors, and to gigs that are top notch. But there's also a whole entire well of voiceover work out there that you can tap into on your own, right? You can contact producers on your own, which used to be unheard of, okay? That a talent would contact a producer without a middle person.
Yes.
Now you can do it. So the people who aren't afraid to do that, some people are like, well, I don't want to like bug the producers. And I say, you're not bugging them. They're used to it now.
Yes.
Right? You might just have contacted them right when they needed someone like you. So that's something that's changed. And I think that will lead you to more success in the industry.
Well, you basically need a business plan because voiceover acting or artistry has its own business side of things. And you need to execute a business plan in order to achieve
absolutely
working status. But imagine, so I mean, somebody who doesn't have an established voiceover acting career and is pursuing this medium. So and they have other stuff to do. How does your student do that 24/7? How does he market himself? What does the marketing and being proactive look like?
Well, I mean, look, it's all emails and websites and everything like that.
You just tell them you exist.
Yes. I mean, it's not about footwork anymore,
Right.
It's just about, devoting some time in front of your computer, doing what you need to do. Going on LinkedIn, all the social media, look. Sometimes you'll find work, on X and on LinkedIn and on Instagram and TikTok. It's Googling producers. It's doing all of that kind of work, which might take a couple hours of your day, right? Look, there's a lot of people out there where voiceover is a side hustle for them. They have a full-time job and they do voiceovers at night, right? There are the pay-to-play sites like voices.com, where you can send your auditions anytime. You can really literally pursue this industry right from home. You don't have to go anywhere, right? Unless you book a job and they decide to send you to a studio.
Right.
But if you have a home studio, I mean, I don't go anywhere. I have a home studio. I do all my work here. I'm not in it now. This is just what I use for coaching.
Right.
But it's really a pursuit that doesn't take a whole lot except some time and some energy. I don't know how much energy it takes to sit in front of your computer, but you have to devote some time to it and
dedication
and like you said, you got to have a plan. Like, I want to get more corporate work. Let me see what I can do about that. That type of thing.